So today I'm going to talk about the legendary Steve Ditko, and he passed away in 2018. He's generally regarded as the co-creator of Spider-Man, so he cemented his legacy in comics early on. An interesting fellow, a very interesting fellow. Um, he left Marvel, and my understanding is it was over a dispute with Stan Lee. I think Stan Lee, as often he does, was trying to take all the credit for everything, and and I think that he didn't like the way that the character was being presented or something. Steve Ditko is the kind of creator who he has his ideas about how things should be done, and with him, it's my way or the highway. I think the problem with Steve Ditko was he wasn't talented enough to get that kind of authority, and so people would basically just say, okay, get lost. But Steve Ditko definitely wanted to do his own thing, create his own characters. He went to Charlton Comics and created a lot of different characters, including The Question and some other characters. And I'm forgetting right now. I have his Wikipedia page up. But he created a lot of different things, and I'll show you one. So he eventually returned to DC Comics, and he worked on Blue Beetle, The Question, and Captain Atom, but I think he only created The Question. The Question was intended as a character that was representative of his objectivist viewpoints. He was a follower of Ayn Rand, but it was kind of watered down because even though Charlton wasn't DC or Marvel, they still had some kind of restrictions on what creators were able to do. So it was kind of a watered down version of what he truly wanted to create. And The Question has definitely been an enduring character, although at this point I'd say that it's recently anything I've read with The Question is barely recognizable as what it's actually a woman at this point, barely recognizable from what it started as. And although I am definitely not an objectivist at all, I think that if you are going to use that character, that I think that that's kind of the whole point of the character is his or her beliefs. So when he wasn't able to create the character that, well, let me step back for a moment before we get to Mr. A. So he went back to DC for a while, and so here shows some of the characters that he created, and I would say that they are not particularly enduring. The Creeper, he's around sometimes. Hawk and Dove probably the most enduring, but some of the other characters. So we have here the Odd Man, Stalker, the Changing Man, Starman, another version of. It's a different version than the original Starman. These are characters that didn't. They're strange characters. He was a creative fellow, but I'm not sure that the sales numbers weren't that great because I think that a lot of people rejected it, and I think Hawk and Dove was really kind of emblematic of the kind of person that Steve Ditko was, and I get the impression a lot of people liked working with Steve Ditko, and some people did not like working with Steve Ditko because he was very uncompromising. And again, I just don't think he was talented enough to get by with being that uncompromising. Alan Moore is uncompromising, but he is incredibly talented. So in many ways, he gets away with it. So the thing with Hawk and Dove was created by Steve Ditko and Steve Skeets. Sorry. Steve Skeets was the writer, but Steve Ditko was also involved in writing. So the point was you had two characters. One was a pacifist and one was more aggressive, but it was more of one was a conservative and one was a liberal. So the problem happened almost immediately, which was that Skeets identified with Dove, who was the liberal, and Ditko identified with Hawk, who was the conservative. And Steve Ditko really kind of wanted to make Dove look like an idiot. And so they got in a little bit of a fight, and I think he bailed out. I think Ditko bailed out at like issue number 3 or something. He bailed out pretty early because he just wasn't willing. He wanted Hawk to be right. And I think that Skeets wanted more of just kind of I think that the concept had a lot of potential, but Ditko wasn't willing to mine that potential. I think that you could have had each one presenting their own viewpoint, but Ditko just wanted to make Dove look like an idiot, useless, and so other people have taken up the characters, and I think did a much better job, because Steve Ditko almost immediately bailed on the project, and eventually left DC because I think DC probably didn't really want him anymore. He wasn't creating marketable characters. So Mr. A is self-published. I have a lot of these comics. So he did a lot of self-publishing. And I just was fascinated by it. I was fascinated by Mr. A. He is much closer to what Steve Ditko wanted than The Question. And so the point of Mr. A is, it's kind of from Ayn Rand, is A equals A. Basically, we are what we are. So if you're bad, you're bad. If you're good, you're good. And here we have it. Your only choice, good or evil. And so what he had was, Mr. A was a pitiless, I don't even know if he would be called a hero. Now, certainly in the comics, and we see this all the time, which is that the bad guys are bad and the good guys are good, and never the twain shall meet. But he really was quite pitiless. And I believe Mr. A first appeared in Wit's End, which was a fanzine started by Wally Wood. I think when Mr. A came out, Wally Wood no longer had anything to do with it, or he wasn't in charge of it anymore. And Mr. A was so, a lot of times when Steve Ditko would write this stuff, he just starts pontificating. And Mr. A might be just his mouthpiece. Initiators of force have abandoned their minds, reason, and right. Since they choose to act like wild beasts, they should be treated like beasts. So here this is part of his objectivist view. Initiation of force, retaliation to force, seeking the truth, evasion. So he was just kind of moralizing to the reader, and I think a lot of people were not really interested in that. But it was funny because after he appears in Wit's End, and I can't remember who it was, but it was a fairly famous creator, had a rebuttal to Mr. A in the next issue of Wit's End, where basically mocked the creation of Steve Ditko, and Steve Ditko kind of bailed. Wit's End was pretty much done at that point anyway, but Steve Ditko, I'm sure that he did not appreciate being mocked in the very comic that he had produced for. So Mr. A, it was Alan Moore has admitted that Mr. A was the inspiration for Rorschach. And so the Watchmen were originally supposed to be use the Charlton characters, and then DC said, no, we don't want, because you're basically going to destroy the characters we just bought. So he created new characters, but Rorschach was supposed to be the Question from Charlton Comics, but I believe Alan Moore has admitted that Rorschach was actually supposed to be more Mr. A, because Mr. A was a more extreme character. And to Alan Moore's incredible credit, he didn't write Mr. A as some kind of a parody or some kind of a straw man, that he tried to legitimately show the viewpoint of what Steve Ditko had created. And to a lot of people, they saw him as a hero. And I don't think that was Alan Moore's intention. And so I think a lot of people misunderstand what Rorschach is supposed to be. I don't think he saw him necessarily as a hero. And Alan Moore even wrote a song about Mr. A, again, mocking Mr. A for what he was. So Steve Ditko continued to, so here we have, this is from 2010. Steve Ditko died in 2008. So, I'm sorry, 2018. He didn't die before he published. So he was going to be, and he died at 90, so he would have been 82 when he came out with this. So these are all self-published. He put up the money. You could look at the covers. They look like garbage. They look terrible. His, he had a very unique artistic style. And clearly his talents had slipped significantly as he got older. Unfortunately, that's what happens. This is, I think, the last one I have. $4 for this black and white. So this is 2012, so he would be dead in 6 years after this. 32 pages. And the art is just like a high school student, and like not a talented high school student. But even worse than that was the writing. The writing at this point is incomprehensible. It's just, I don't even understand. I know that a lot of times he was trying to push his objectivist viewpoint. I don't even know what he was trying to say. I would read through these and I couldn't figure out who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, what is the point? Because I think his mind was slipping. He was kind of, as happens with a lot of people, that I think objectivism had taken over his thoughts, and he could not express them anymore. And it's just gibberish. If I ever sat down and read one of these stories, they're incomprehensible, and the artwork is not good. So I don't know if these will be worth something someday, because they are interesting, and I doubt they sold many. And there's actually a lot more than this. This is not the complete. They were fairly cheap. I'd have to look up what they were, but unfortunately, Steve Ditko did not. He did not go out on a high note. He created a lot of characters that were not enduring. Some of them were. A few of them were. I think he was very talented. Sometimes, you can give him credit as someone who was uncompromising. He had his values, and he was not willing to bend. I just don't agree with his values. And and I just don't think that his ideas resonated. And I think that Hawk and Dove is probably the most, I was like, there was somebody, I can't remember what it was. It was like the question, or one of the characters, and I can't remember. I think it may have been the question, and he wasn't writing it. Someone else was writing, and the writer said something like, I was just imagine like, to the villain, how does it feel to be something, my friend? And I guess that Steve Ditko went ballistic, saying how he would never call the villain my friend. But clearly what he was saying it mockingly. He wasn't literally calling the person my friend, but the writer was kind of freaked out because he wrote this long letter, really getting angry. And I think Hawk and Dove is absolutely it shows you the kind of person Ditko was, which is that he was not willing to compromise. He was not willing to show Dove's side of the story. He wanted to make Dove an idiot. And if he couldn't do that, then he was done. And the story would have been much, much better if you presented each side in their own light, not some kind of, idiotic. Dove wasn't even a good fighter. He was just worthless. And that's what he wanted. He wanted Dove to be absolutely worthless and Hawk to be the hero. And so as a story, for pushing his ideology, maybe as some kind of propaganda piece, but as storytelling, it was terrible. And I own all the issues of Hawk and Dove, but I didn't even realize when I first got it that Steve Ditko bailed out right away at the very beginning. I think there was only 5 issues anyway, including 5 issues plus there was another issue. I can't remember. Anyway, so that was the finale for Steve Ditko. I don't know that this is his last issue, but unfortunately, it was crap. It was terrible. I don't know. You could probably find these comics out there somewhere, and they are interesting just from a sociological standpoint and a standpoint of somebody who was a legend in comics, but had a bit of an ignominious fall. But that's Steve Ditko.